Garrett, right? All right, Joe. If you are, you might be. And 5. Justin Brothers. Great. No, okay, good. So, let's begin. Toss of 1. The protagonist of a novel set in this country is whipped after spilling soup on the chaperone of Isabelle Roget, whose parents he later murders. 5 daughters of Jack Wilkins with mythological names are led by a woman named Homer in that novel, which is narrated by the daughter of Robert Quinn and Lilith. The Storm Posse fights a gang war in Copenhagen City in this country in a novel in which Josie Wales tries to arrange the death of the singer. That novel was written by the author of The Book of Night Women. Paul H's family is murdered by Christopher in this country, and the transsexual Harry Harriet convinces Claire Savage to return here in the novel No Telephone from Heaven. This country is the location of the Colibri Plantation, the setting of the first section of the Wide Sargasso Sea. 10 points named as home country of Michelle Cliff and Drake. 10.
All bang.
Here is your bonus. A silver denarius displayed at Newcastle University shows an unusually sharp-pointed version of this feature to match the hook one belonging to Mark Antony on the other side. Temperate identified as body part of an Egyptian ruler, which according to your quote from Blaise Pascal's Pensées, would have changed the face of the world had it been shorter.
Cleopatra's Notes.
Yeah. A number of this former Librarian of Congress's essays on the unexpected are collected in a work titled Cleopatra's Nose. This exponent of consensus history included the discoverers and the seekers in his knowledge trilogy.
Is this, his name is Daniel,
What you got?
Daniel something.
Yeah, Daniel Burston. Fuck. Cleopatra's Nose also lends its name to an essay collection, including many pieces on fashion designers by this New Yorker staff writer. Her books include Secrets of the Flesh, a biography of Colette, and Isaac Dinesen, The Life of the Storyteller. That's Judith Thurman. Toss up 3. Sorry. In the early days of this king's reign, his praises were sung in a series of 5 prophetic poems by a self-proclaimed Marshal of Stratford at Bow named Adam Davie. In the poem, The Sayings of the Four Philosophers, this king's rule is criticized by 4 wise men who lament that he broke regulations imposed by the lords or ordainers. A poem that begins, We were in break and lawn, and manslaught is he come, titled For This Ruler's Evil Times, is a social commentary on the ineffectiveness of his rule and the widespread famine that struck Europe during his reign. He himself was credited with writing a lament after his removal from the throne at Kenilworth Castle.
Is that Richard II?
No. And subsequent imprisonment at Berkeley Castle at the behest of his wife Isabella of France. For 10 points named this English king, whose some popularity stemmed from his relationship with Piers Gaveston.
Edward II.
That's right. This enzyme regulates the replication of the 2-micron plasmid in yeast for 10 points each. Named this recombinase that can be used to delete DNA sequences between 2 FRT sites. Another enzyme with this same name moves phospholipids from the outer leaflet to the inner leaflet.
This is Creed. Creed.
No, it's flipase. This sequence removed by flipases often encodes proteins with this function. Sorry, the sequence removed by flipases often encodes proteins with this function. To select for successful transformants, plasmids often code for enzymes with this function, like beta-lactamases.
So like antibacterial resistance?
Yeah.
Resistance to antibiotics?
Yeah. Flipase and homologous recombination were used to construct this 3,895 member deletion library in E. coli, which contains knockouts of every non-essential gene in K12 strains.
What was it asking for?
I don't know. The name of the library, I think. The library of the 3,000.
What do you got?
No.
Okay, it's called the KO collection. K-E-I-O. Toss up 3. The restoring force in the Fletcher equation equals gravity times the deflection times this quantity. This quantity is roughly equal to 1/4 the power of velocity times 310 in SI units, according to the empirical Gardner's equation. The Bourget correction is proportional to both the plate thickness and this quantity, all multiplied by big G times 2 pi. The Pratt model allows this quantity to vary laterally, whereas the Airy model assumes that it is constant for all blocks. Like velocity, this quantity decreases with radius, with discontinuities on a preliminary reference growth model. Evaluating Pascal's law at the zone of compensation explains the interplay between height and this quantity in isostasy, where Horowitz realized that an increase in p-wave velocity implied that this quantity must abruptly increase in the mantle. For 10 points, in this quantity, which is about 2,700 kilograms per cubic meter.
Density? Thinking that the whole time.
Before you answer the following about the life and times of Hieronymus Koch, I want you to know that his wife had the incredibly Belgian name of Volkskinderix. There's a lot, there's 2 X's in there, for 10 points each. In 1559 and 1561, Koch published 2 series of etchings of 44 locations in and around Antwerp. The anonymous artist of those etchings is now referred to by this name. What you got?
The Etcher of Flanders.
It's the master of the small landscapes. Koch also published this engraving by Burley the Elder, which depicts a man in a boat in the foreground directing his son's attention toward the central scene, in which a helmeted figure with a huge knife guts a gigantic creature, causing a number of similar creatures to spill out.
Yeah. The slaying of
Yeah.
Leviathan.
It's the big fish eat the little fish. In an effort to increase the sales of Big Fish Eat Little Fish, Koch attributed it to this earlier artist of the 7 Deadly Sins and the 4 Last Things, whose many triptychs include the Hay Wain.
Yeah.
There's 2 ones. 4. In a myth about this deity, a boy named Sunasepa is offered as a sacrifice to him in place of the treacherous king Harishchandra's child. The Paravar people claim to be descended from this deity, who is the subject of a hymn telling of how he is always present when 2 people plot and how he used his knotted nooses to entrap liars. That hymn is from the Atharva Veda. A chariot with a Kapidwaj banner, 2 inexhaustible quivers, and a bow he had possessed for 100 years were this deity's gifts to Arjuna. That's incorrect. Like Ganga, this deity rides a half-Icene creature called a Makara. This deity is responsible for maintaining Vrta, or order, often alongside his counterpart and fellow Aditya Mitra. After this god fails to respond to 3-day penance, Rama threatens to destroy him with the Brahmastra, but this god apologizes and then pacifies his domain so Nala can build a bridge across it. 10 points in is Vedic sea deity.
Varuna.
That's right.
Yes. I was gonna say Mitra, but luckily they named already, so. Otherwise I would have named.
James Wood's review, The Uses of Oblivion, called this novel's allegory too literal and too vague. For 10 points each, named this 2015 novel about the Briton couple Axel and Beatrice, who are joined by a Saxon warrior named Wiston and the knight Sir Gawain on a journey to discover the sources of the amnesia-causing mist plaguing the world.
The Buried Giant.
The Buried Giant is the newest novel by this author. Wood was much more approving of his 2005 dystopian sci-fi novel about cloning, Never Let Me Go. Wood also savaged this dreamlike 1995 novel by Ishiguro, in which a classical pianist named Ryder arrives in an unnamed European city to give a concert, but somehow never quite manages to.
It's gonna be the Unconsoled.
30 points.
Nice. Terror.
5. The second theme of this piece's first major movement is introduced by the 2 lowest voices playing in thirds and sixths in the distant key of E-flat major. The last 4 bars of this piece's second movement modulate from E major to F minor and back, reflecting the key changes between that adagio's movement A and B sections. After the exposition of the first movement ends with the G major chord, it modulates to A major at the outset of the development. A noted recording of this piece was produced by Pablo Casals and Paul Tortelier at the 1952 Prags Festival. The scherzo of Brahms's piano quintet alludes to this piece's final cadence, which features all instruments in unison playing a D-flat grace note slurred to a C. This work was premiered posthumously in 1850, and its first long movement was likely inspired by Mozart's K515 in the same genre and key. Mstislav Rostropovich produced recordings of this piece with both the Milos and the Emerson quartets for 10 points in his final string chamber work by Franz Schubert.
The trumpet, the trumpet.
No.
That is incorrect.
That uses an extra cello instead of a second viola. Oh, no, it was
Correction on spinning wheel.
no. It's the string quintet in C major for D956 or Overture.
Sure.
It was all a totally different.
Aye. Next up. This man's research efforts were aided by a transfer of patents from an inventor in Slovakian Pennsylvanian priest Joseph Murgas. This man introduced a historical address by Pope Pius XI by mentioning that God places so many mysterious forces of nature at man's disposal. After this man supervised the installation of a structure still in use at the Vatican today. He also supervised the building of a structure on a bluff near Wellfleet, Massachusetts on the Cape Cod Peninsula to compete with the venture started by Cyrus Field. He used a spark-gap device in his initial experiments, including a demonstration in which the message, "Are you ready?" was conveyed from Flatholm Island to Lavernock Point across the Bristol Channel. Harold Bride and Jack Phillips, who worked for this man's namesake company, sent distress signals from
Marconi.
That's it.
Yeah.
Here's a bonus. Ioannis Koletas is credited with inventing this term, which was reflected in King George's title, King of the Hellenes, instead of King of Greece. For 10 points each, give the Greek term for this irredentist concept, whose broad goal was to unite all Greeks under one flag.
Enosis? Yeah.
Oh,
Enosis.
What do you got?
Enosis.
It's the Megali idea.
Oh.
The death of the Megali idea is usually traced to the population exchanges between Turkey and Greece, resulting from this 1923 treaty signed in Switzerland. It replaced the rejected Treaty of Sèvres. Yeah, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed in the wake of a 10-day Great Fire that devastated this Turkish port on the Aegean in 1922.
Which one?
Smyrna?
Sure.
Smyrna.
Yeah. 20.
Smyrna, it's
Yeah.
Here is toss of 7. They are not disembodied wax limbs, but visual artist Robert Gover has created over 50 increasingly abstract objects of this type in response to the AIDS epidemic. These objects were disparagingly invoked in the title of an article in Encounter by British art critic David Sylvester, who mentioned them in the body of the article after babies' nappies on the line. A group known as the Beaux Art Quartet, including Derek Greaves, Edward Middleditch, and Jack Smith, formed the core of an artistic movement better known as a group named after these objects. That art movement was named after a painting depicting one of these objects by John Bratby. 10 points named these objects that name a gritty school of 1950s realist British painters who depicted working class lives and associated with the angry young men.
Kitchen sink.
Hasdai Crescus initially argued that against this philosopher's view that human and divine attributes share a common essence. For 10 points each, named this early 14th century philosopher, astronomer, and proponent of astrological determinism, who discussed 6 philosophical questions in The Wars of the Lord, which claimed that God does not know particulars.
Is this like
I do not know.
Who do you have?
Moses Maimonides.
Okay, it's Gersonides.
Yeah.
Like his fellow Aristotelian Maimonides, Gersonides belonged to the rationalist tradition within this religion, as the thinkers of the Haskalah. Indeed. In the first book of the Wars of the Lord, Gersonides defended the immortality of the soul, which was also defended by another Jewish philosopher, Moses Mendelssohn, in this text, which is named similarly to the Socratic dialogue, which proposes 4 arguments for it. What you got?
The Republic of the Lord.
The Phaedon.
Stuff.
Okay.
That was 20 points.
No, 10 points. Okay. So 8. The question, what might an anthropology of this concept look like, appears in the book that opens by challenging Rawls's distinction between core principles and background justifications. That book on the formations of this concept is by Talal Asad. Another book of this concept rejects the subtraction story of its origin and claims that it created a nova effect, resulting in intense cross pressures on individual belief. That book claims that the ascendance of this idea is characterized by the transition from porous to buffered cells and the creation of an immanent frame. Peter Berger backtracked on his prediction in The Sacred Canopy that individual capitalism and pluralism would cause the triumph of this notion. This kind of age gives this title to a Charles Taylor book. Max Weber's 3-pronged theory of the development of this notion is
like atheist age?
Is hinged on social stratification, individualism, and scientific achievement. A key text for its development in the United States was a letter sent to the Danbury Baptist Association, which uses the phrase wall of separation. For 10 points in this concept, exemplified by French laicite, which religion is separate from life.
Separation of church and state.
Yeah, I'll take
Freedom of religion.
Well,
your bonus. Oh, this nickname was first bestowed in the 1196 Gesta of Rigord and was given to a territorial expander who was originally known as Dudon, or God-given for 10 points each. Give this nickname bestowed upon the first ruler to call himself the King of France rather than the King of the France.
Augustus?
Yeah.
Or just Augustus, yeah.
Philip Augustus earned his epithet shortly after crushing Philip I, the count of this region, in a territorial dispute. This county near Picardy and Artois was in a personal union with Burgundy after 1405.
Maybe.
You got it.
Exxon?
Flanders. Philip Augustus gained even more territory after this disaster 1214 defeat for King John of England that prompted the signing of the Magna Carta.
Over?
Yeah, 20 points. 9. The inability to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate explicability arguments has led Michael Della Roca to embrace this philosophical idea. Peter van Inwagen and Jonathan Bennett considered the conjunction of all contingent true statements in a paper that argues that this statement implies necessitarianism. Anaximander is often credited with first invoking this idea to explain why the Earth is stationary. Kant identifies this idea with the causal principle in the second analogy of experience in the Critique of Pure Reason, and earlier attacked Christian Wolff's argument that this statement is self-evident in the new elucidation. Though it notably does not appear explicitly in the axioms of the ethics, Spinoza uses this principle to deduce the necessary existence of God and to reduce concepts like existence and causation to intelligibility. The principle of contradiction in this idea grounded the philosophy of Leibniz.
Principle of sufficient reason.
Here's your bonus. And so finally about Armenian mythology for teach. The Armenian war god Bahadur, the dragon slayer, came to be identified with the deified form of this Greek hero who completed 12 labors in service to the king Eurystheus of Tyrants. Yeah. Due to identification with the earlier Urartian storm god worshipped in Armenia, Bahadur adopted some aspects of this Hurrian sky god who was conceived when Kumarbi ate the genitals of his father Anu.
Enki.
No, it's Teshup. After her husband Ninus abandoned her, this legendary Assyrian queen sent a proposal to the Armenian warrior Ara the Beautiful, which he rejected due to his marriage to Nvard. As a result, this woman started a war in which Ara was killed. What do you got? Semiramis.
Oh.
Let's see, you got toss up 10. This book's source material has been traced to the so-called Talbot Wisdom Notebook. The preface to this book includes stand up for the stupid and crazy, unlove the earth and sun and the animals, and a list of advice following the declaration, this is what you shall do. William Douglas O'Connor wrote a vindication of the author of this book, which is the subject of the final chapter in D.H. Lawrence's Studies in Classic American Literature. Its original frontispiece featured the Carpenter portrait of its author, in which he stands with his hand on his hip while wearing his work clothes. Its author advertised it by highlighting the line, I greet you at the beginning of a great career, from a congratulatory letter sent by Emerson. This book's preface claims the United States themselves are essentially the greatest poem, and its final deathbed edition was released in 1892. 10 Points named this poetry collection that includes clusters of poems called Children of Adam and Calamus, as well as hundreds of other poems by Walt Whitman. Just the leaves of grass. It's what it is. Senator-elect John Carlyle authored a declaration of the people during this meeting for 10 points each. Named this 1861 meeting that elected Francis Harrison Pierpont the governor of a restored government. What do you got?
Charleston meeting.
This is called the Wheeling Convention. The dire working conditions of antebellum Wheeling inspired Rebecca Harding Davis to pen this short realist story that follows the travails of the consumptive puddler Hugh Wolfe.
I don't think I know any stories about consumptive puddlers.
The West Virginia.
No, it's Life in the Iron Mills. From 1849 to 1851, Wheeling was home to the largest structure in the world of this type, designed by Charles Ellich Jr., one designed by John Augustus Roebling that employed steel cable spans the East River between Manhattan and Brooklyn.
Bridge. Suspension bridge.
All right, after half, I have a score of 75 to 125.
Yep.
No disagreements?
Does ACF fall off of bridges?
Toss up 11. You gotta know these bridges. Negotiations with this group during one incident were aided by the former Special Forces member Jin Yu. The Muqtadir brothers were accused of selling captives to this organization. A group of 12 prayer warriors from the Jesus Miracle Crusade visited this group's headquarters only to be captured. One attack carried out by this group was done using several pounds of TNT stuck into a television. That attack, which notably killed 6 students on their way to a national journalism competition, was the bombing of Super Ferry 14. This group coordinated with 14K to kidnap several tourists at a dive resort in order to exchange them for Ramzi Youssef, one of the perpetrators of the 1983 WT World Trade Center bombings. This group's leader, Isnolam Totoni Hapalong, has a $5 million bounty on his head due to his role in the Dos Palmas kidnappings. This group broke off from the MNLF after being given $6 million by Osama bin Laden, and its name means father of the swordsmith. For 10 points, this Islamist terror group from the Philippines.
Melf.
That's incorrect.
That is one.
That is time. Yes, it's Abu Sayyaf.
Yeah, I feel that.
Woo! Toss of 12. The 8th chapter of this work, which describes the murder of Billy Brooks Jr., takes its title from a phrase in a 1965 speech given at Howard University by Lyndon Johnson. The first chapter of this work profiles a man who, as a 10-year-old boy, was forced to sell a horse with a red coat for $17. The man's response, "So that's just one of my losses," title of this chapter. The 3 epigraphs to this piece are from Deuteronomy 15:12 through 15, Locke's second treatise, and an anonymous person who said, "We have earned the right to the soil, and now we are determined to have it." This long essay contains an extended discussion of Clyde Ross, who bought a home on contract in the North Lawndale neighborhood of Chicago, and helped form the Contract Buyers League to combat predatory housing sales. The intro to this piece states that America must reckon with our compounding moral debts after mentioning 35 years of racist housing policy, 60 years of separate but equal, and 250 years of slavery. For 10 points, name is June 2014 essay in the Atlantic by Ta-Nehisi Coates.
The case for reparation.
That's right.
That's like on the computer right now.
You truly sure.
Because I
Here is the bonus. This historian's only known work is a commentary on the lost history by Gnaeus Pompeius Trogus, for 10 points each. Name this Roman historian whose epitome on Trogus, or epitome perhaps, on Trogus was likely written somewhere between AD 100 and 500. That's a pretty wide range of.
Wow.
What do you got?
Pseudo-Trogus.
It's a good answer, but not the correct answer. The correct answer is Justin, or Marcus Junianus Justinus, or Justin Martyr. Justin is one of the sources for the corruption of Ashurbanipal into the name of this legendarily decadent and likely fictional Assyrian ruler, whose death was shown by Eugene Delacroix.
Yeah, started off.
Trogus is also known through quotations in this work, published around the time of its author's death in AD 79, which was translated into English by Philemon Holland.
Pliny the young.
The elder is the naturalist.
The one who died.
So the elder.
What do you have?
Pliny the elder.
Okay. And?
Oh.
Okay. The correct answer is the natural history of
Oh.
It's the effort that counts there.
looking for
Your work. Learn to consult.
Okay. Toss of 13. This author wrote a farce in which a divorce court judge listens to 4 oral arguments and declares that he won't let anybody divorce in his courtroom. Philip Massinger's The Renegado is based on the play by this author, titled For the Baths of the City where this author lived. The sorcerer Marquino wets his lance with a drop of water, then strikes a coffin resurrecting a corpse in a play by this author. Later in that drama, a young lad jumps off a tower in the midst of a metaphorical ravaging by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Aurelio and Sylvia love each other in captivity in a play by this author titled For a Treaty. The first act of one of his tragedies ends with a discussion between Spain and the river Duero after a heroic speech given by Scipio Africanus in preparation for a bloody incident in the Celtiberian Wars. For 10 points, this author of The Voyage of Parnassus and The Siege of Numantia, who set many of his plays in Algiers, where he was imprisoned before he wrote Don Quixote.
So on to this.
Oh, man.
I didn't know these plays by so
Jesus.
So many.
Here is your bonus. Despite being paralyzed by 2 strokes, the character in one of this man's novels tries to write Therese and Laurent killed Camille, but fails part of the way through. 10 points each. Again, this French naturalist writer, the leader of the Madame group. He wrote Therese Raquin and a series of novels that feature the volunteer family.
So, isn't that just Zola?
Yeah. In an amusing letter to the creator of this fictional animal, Zola wrote that he was glad it died because it would have cracked the carpet. This animal was purchased from the Palais Royal to complement an Oriental rug and then encrusted with rare jewels in the shape of a bouquet of flowers. What you got? It's the tortoise from Aragorn. Evelyn Waugh paid homage to Huysmans' tortoise in Brideshead Revisited by having this ambitious Canadian businessman give a diamond-studded tortoise to Julia Flight, from whom he later separates.
Deep Rising Knowledge. Alright. Can we guess Ryder? Maybe they had a cousin that had a Ryder.
Ryder.
No, it's Rex Mottram. 14. The Jones-Imboden Trail and the McNeil Raid both aimed at disrupting this company, which was led by Daniel Willard during the early decades of the 20th century. This company exclusively used the Bowman Truss, which was designed by one of its engineers. Its president, John W. Garrett, alerted Lew Wallace about Confederate activity before the Battle of Monocacy, which was fought to protect its local junction. Peter Cooper redesigned the Tom Thumb to convince the owners of this railroad to use steam power. The Great Railroad Strike in 1877 began in response to this railroad cutting wages 3 times in 1 year. After John Brown's raid seized one of its trains, this railroad transported government soldiers to Harper's Ferry. Stonewall Jackson conducted a campaign to sabotage this railroad in 1861 because it was the only railroad into Washington, D.C. After being incorporated in 1827, it was the first American railroad to offer regular passenger and freight service. Templates named this Mid-Atlantic Railroad that spanned from a port city to a Midwestern state.
Vietnam.
Here's your bonus.
Yeah.
This text outlines 8 rasas, or overriding emotional themes, as well as 4 types of expression: song, gesture, costume, and emoting. For templates, each identifies each Indian manual as stagecraft attributed to the sage Bharata. It was the subject of the famed commentary Abhinava Bharati. Abhinava Bharata.
I'm the foggiest in the group.
Oh, sorry, you don't know about the Natya Shastra. Among the genres laid out in the Natya Shastra is the Bana, which are one-act plays about dissolute heroes that share this production characteristic with Chekhov's On the Harmful Effects of Tobacco and Samuel Beckett's Craps Last Tape.
This is like no withdrawal.
They share this production characteristic. So I know they're not on stage.
Not being on stage.
No, they're written for one character.
Oh.
The author of the Natya Shastra shares the name Bharata with the son of this literary character, whose signet ring is eventually recognized by her husband Dushyanta in the most famous play of Kalidasa. 15. At low temperature, this quantity decreases when there is an odd number of atoms in a droplet, but stays the same for even number of atoms due to the alternation of a singlet at the Fermi level with overall spin 0 SETs. A model for this quantity gives it proportional to the sum of the temperature squared, temperature to the 5th, and the logarithm of 1 over the temperature. 1 over the temperature is given as a third-order power series, and the logarithm of this quantity in the Steinhart-Hart equation. The Anderson model explains why this quantity is minimized at a given temperature due to tunnel coupling from impurities. 4 times Boltzmann's constant times temperature times this quantity gives the constant spectral density of Johnson-Nyquist noise. Bolometers useful for measuring radiations use NTDs because of this quantity's strong temperature dependence. At low temperatures, this quantity will show nonlinearities due to the Kondo effect. Pinpoints name this quantity, which drops to 0 at low temperatures in superconductors.
Resistance.
That's right. Happens. Here's a bonus. The right-hand side of this equation often simplifies Q accounts for collisions. For templates, each name this fundamental equation of microscopic fluid dynamics, which reduces to a Maxwellian distribution of equilibrium. The Maxwellian distribution is sometimes co-named for the German namesake of this theorem. Disposal for you. Yeah.
Patrick Sleep on.
Okay, it's called the Boltzmann transport equation.
To help you with this?
If the collision term is set to 0, then the Boltzmann transport equation reduces to this other equation, which sets the convective derivative of the probability density function f equal to negative dv dt, dotted with the velocity divergence of f.
I don't understand what happened.
What you got?
Velocity.
The what?
Nothing.
Velocity.
No, it's the Vlasov equation. The linearization of the Vlasov equation, according to the first order perturbation theory, gives the linear form of this quantity as proportional to the cube of the angular frequency over the wave number squared. It's usually symbolized gamma.
That's a thing to do. Third letter of the Greek alphabet.
Okay,
No.
we don't know. It's the Landau damping rate. You get that?
It's okay. We didn't want to anyway.
That's me. Oh boy. The McConnell stacking rule for these compounds uses the so-called non-star rule to predict if their orbitals will be disjoint and non-disjoint. The Beckwith-Hope transition state model explains why the 5-hexanyl reclosure of these compounds is exo. The rate of rearrangement of these compounds is listed in the horologery. Many reactions involving these compounds have an order of 1.5 with respect to them. Germinate recombination times the reactivity of these compounds according to their namesake cage mechanism. Whatever. Sigma donors and acceptors on these compounds will synergistically reduce their overall energy. These compounds form stable adducts with nitroso or nitrone groups. One of these compounds with a propeller-like structure is formed by reacting tritilyl chloride with silver and turns a darker shade of yellow when exposed to air. The definition of these compounds have a SOMO. The release of nitrogen gas from AIBN is coupled to the synthesis of two of these compounds. Antimercarbonic addition of hydrogen bromide across a double bond forms one of them in the first step. 10 points name is paramagnetic compounds, which have an odd number of electrons.
Radicals?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, you know, basic science.
Rad, Joe.
Red buzz.
In the outrage of Gibeah, men of this tribe raped to death a concubine of a man of the tribe of Levi, sparking a war that led the other tribes to nearly wipe this tribe out for 10 points each. Named this tribe of Israel, sandwiched geographically between Ephraim and Judah. It later joined the Judah to form the kingdom of Judah.
Ephraim is the son of, like, maybe it's like Manasseh, maybe? It might be next
Yeah.
Manasseh.
It's the tribe of Benjamin. The outrage of Gibeah is described in the epilogue to this 7th book of the Hebrew Bible. The title characters, including Deborah and Gideon, are divinely inspired leaders who delivered Israel from faithfulness and hardship. Judges. The Song of Deborah and Barak praises this wife of Heber for killing the Canaanite general Sisera by driving a tent peg through his forehead.
Jail.
That's right.
Nice.
Do not pass go. 17. Woo! The pyrrolopyridine derivative RK2449 inhibits HCK in these cells after a spontaneous phenotypic switch causes them to overproduce SFKs. The Cairns-Noel model proposes that these cells are the ones that respond earliest to selective pressures. A conventional aldel assay can detect these cells, which are killed after treatment with 3-BROP due to inhibition of glycolysis. They turn up in a FACS assay susceptible for CD34 positive, CD38 negative cells. The potassium ionophore selenomycin selectively targets these cells. John Dick discovered these cells by xenografting in gnawed skid mice and showing that only about 4% developed AML. Subclonal diversity implies that the concentration of these cells is much higher than expected. These cells are enriched in patients with minimal residual disease, which explains how they lead to remittances. These cells are further classified to sphere-forming neoplastic and culture-forming neoplastic for 10 points, named these non-differentiated cells, which turn into cancer stem cells. That's what they are.
I was trying to think of the term for cancer cells.
Tumors.
Here you go. In this opera, Glück das mir verblieb, also known as the Boot Song, is a duet sung by Marietta and Paul, who believes that Marietta is a reincarnation of his wife Marie. 10 points each. Named this 1920 opera based on the Georges Rodenbach novel Bruges la Mort. Its title refers to the city of Bruges, where its libretto was written by its composer and his father under the pseudonym Paul Schott.
First Bruges. In Bruges.
Sadly, no.
The
Okay, you don't know this. The Dead City. This Jewish Austro-Hungarian composer of The Dead City collaborated on the libretto with his father Julius before moving to the United States. He was the first composer commissioned to write a left-handed piano concerto for Paul Wittgenstein.
Julius.
What have you for me?
Benjamin.
Eric Korngold. Eric Wolfgang Korngold was one of the first major composers of music to accompany this medium, along with Max Steiner and Alfred Newman. Korngold's scores for this medium include The Adventures of Robin Hood and Anthony Adverse.
Movie, film.
Yeah, film. Alright. Jeffrey Mason argues that Romain Rolland's concept of the oceanic feeling was drawn from both this religious figure and his most famous students, both subjects of biographies by Rolland. This man's practice of both Islam and Christianity led him to have separate visions of Jesus and Muhammad merging with his body. In the track subtitled "Didn't Anyone Check the Documentation?", Swami Tyagananda alleged systematic mistranslations in a previous book, noting a homoerotic strain in this man's thought. That book is Kali's Child by Jeffrey Kripal. He advocated the renunciation of Kamaka and Chana, or lust and gold, and taught that all living things are Shiva. Mahendranath Gupta compiled a 5-volume work about this man that Swami Nityananda translated as The Gospel of This Man. Bhairavi Brahmani initiated this man into Tantra, and as a priest at the Dakshineswar Kali temple, he received a vision of Kali as the universal mother and reached a state of Baba Samadhi. For 10 points, named this 19th century Bengali mystic.
What?
No. The namesake of a Vedanta mission founded by his student Vivekananda. film stars Victoria Lust as a nude woman who allows several insects to traverse her body as this artist hums menacing, buzzing noises. This filmmaker of Fly appeared on stage and invited audience members to cut the clothing off her body in the performance work, Cut Piece. This woman's appearance on stage, sitting cross-legged with a man in a giant expanse of velvet at an artist gathering called the Alchemical Wedding.
Marina Abramovic.
That's incorrect. Spawned an art movement that she called bagism, which encouraged dressing up in person-sized bags to protest racial discrimination. With Lamont Young, she organized concerts in her Chambers Street loft in Tribeca, which led her to become a major exponent of the Fluxus movement. At one of her performance pieces called Painting to Hammer a Nail, she first met a collaborator with whom she staged a 7-day anti-war event in Amsterdam in March 1969 during their honeymoon. I actually saw it. Your bonus. This political theorist's state autonomy theory emphasized the ability for state bureaucracies to pursue ends that are not simply reflective of society's desires, a view later modified in Protecting Soldiers and Mothers for 10 points each. In this Harvard political scientist who claimed that revolutions in France, Russia, and China resulted in both state and class transformation in states and social revolutions.
I do
Super
not know.
important.
Probably should.
What do you got?
Jervis.
Okay, it's Theta Skocpol. Skocpol shared a historical intuitionalist outlook with his fellow Harvard political scientist who claimed that modernization begets instability in political order and changing societies, and that the aftermath of the Carnation Revolution saw a third wave of democratization. Indeed, proponents of state autonomy theory emphasized the role of this institution in maintaining state autonomy. In his first book, Huntington argues that the best way to maintain civilian control over this institution is to professionalize
Like
it.
the army or the military.
That is correct for 20 points.
Soldier in the state. Yeah.
Okay. Last. The radical insincerity of a member of this group was criticized by George Eliot in the essay Worldliness and Other Worldliness. A silken son of pleasure named Lorenzo is the addressee of the last 7 parts of a 9-part poem by a member of this group. That poem fictionalizes his wife's daughter and her husband Henry Temple as Narcissa and Philander, and is sometimes published as The Complaint. Another poem by a member of this group describes the title entity as a dread thing, which causes men to shiver when thou art named. That Robert Blair poem gave its name to this group of poets, whose most famous member contemplated a Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood and a mute inglorious milk.
I fucked it up. The white poets. That's not right.
Okay, that's not correct. Mute Inglorious Milton lying in a location where the curfew tolls the knell of parting day. It's named this group of poets, which included Night Thoughts author Edward Young and Thomas Gray, who set an elegy in its namesake location. Or Gray. Your bonus. Now, we teach also following about the Federal Theater Project. One of the project's most controversial productions was this Mark Blitzstein musical in which Larry Foreman attempts to unionize Steeltown, USA against the opposition of Mr. After the WPA shut it down, it was performed almost entirely from the audience of the Venice Theater. Okay, that is The Cradle Will Rock. The project formed several Negro theater units where this author in County Cullen staged an adaptation of Conjure Man Dies. This author of the children's history, The Story of the Negro, and the historical novel Black Thunder edited the anthology American Negro Poetry. We got Arnold and 10. The Federal Theater Project also staged an adaptation of this author's novel, It Can't Happen Here. He refused the 1926 Pulitzer Prize for his novel by an idealistic doctor, Errol Smith. That is correct. That is the game. The final score is 140 to 220.
I've read Yoko and Connor's entire Wikipedia. I've also read it, and I know Malcolm's entire Wikipedia page. Clearly some wires have gone extremely.
Where are we now?
Round
13?
Yep.
8 is in room 16, 116.
For some reason, I thought the
Is this 116 or this 106?
106. For some reason, I thought the alchemical marriage thing might be that thing she did with Jay-Z. You know, because he was black and she was white. Issue.
Oh, yeah.
He's like serving it there.
Oh, is that Cam Griffin?